Stalingrad, August 1942, a city that became a frontier beyond which the unknown began for German troops. It was here, on the southern approaches to the city, that Lieutenant General Mikhail Stepanovich Shumilov took command of the 64th Army, a formation destined to become the impregnable shield of Stalingrad. Short in stature, with an attentive gaze and a quiet voice, Shumilov did not resemble the typical image of a bombastic commander. But behind this external restraint lay a steel character and a sharp, tactical mind. While Chuikov's army held the center and north of the city, it was Shumilov's 64th Army that transformed the southern districts of Stalingrad into an insurmountable barrier for Paulus's tank wedges. Beketovka, Kuporosnoye, Krasnoarmeysk. The names of these districts are forever etched in history thanks to the steadfastness of Shumilov's soldiers. When German strategists planned the capture of Stalingrad, they overlooked one thing: the character of people like Mikhail Shumilov, whose will to victory proved stronger than the armored armadas of the Wehrmacht. Mikhail Stepanovich Shumilov was born on November 16, 1895, in the village of Verkhne Techeskoye, Perm Governorate, into a simple peasant family. His Ural upbringing and early years of working the land forged the character of the future military leader, persistent, thorough, and devoid of ostentatious bravado. Unlike many Soviet commanders, Shumilov began his military career in the Tsarist army. The First World War found him a 20-year-old youth, and in 1915 he was called to the front as a private soldier. The harsh reality of trench warfare in the imperialist war became his first military school, where theory gave way to the brutal practice of survival. Shumilov met the February Revolution of 1917 already as a non-commissioned officer, demonstrating remarkable command abilities even in lower ranks. When October arrived, Mikhail Stepanovich made his choice. In 1918, he voluntarily joined the ranks of the Red Army. The Civil War became a true forge of military skill for Shumilov. Starting as a platoon commander, he quickly rose to battalion commander and then to regimental commander. His talents were particularly evident in battles against Admiral Kolchak's troops in his native Urals. Shumilov was not a desk strategist. He personally led soldiers into attack, demonstrating a rare combination of personal bravery and tactical wisdom. When the last salvos of the Civil War faded, the young Soviet Republic faced the task of creating a new type of professional army. Shumilov, understanding the necessity of theoretical training, entered the Frunze Military Academy in 1926. His years of study significantly broadened his military horizons, allowing him to combine practical experience with a deep understanding of strategy and operational art. After graduating from the academy, Shumilov's career developed steadily, without sharp ascents or falls. In the 1930s, when many military leaders fell victim to repressions, he continued to serve, consistently commanding a regiment, a brigade, and a division. This period shaped his particular leadership style: thoughtful, devoid of adventurism, based on careful analysis of the situation. Shumilov was not a brilliant orator or a media darling. His authority was built on something else, on profound knowledge of military affairs and a respectful attitude towards his subordinates. He paid special attention to the training of junior commanders, understanding that in modern warfare, they become the key link in control. On the eve of the Great Patriotic War, Mikhail Stepanovich commanded a rifle corps, completing his formation as a mid-level military leader. Behind him were 3 wars, academic education, and invaluable experience in building a regular army. Fate was preparing him for the main test, a battle that would forever inscribe Shumilov's name in Russia's military history. The pre-war years were a time of intensive training and professional growth for Mikhail Shumilov. By the end of the 1930s, he was already commanding a rifle corps, where he proved himself to be a thoughtful and methodical leader. Unlike many commanders who preferred spectacular solutions, Shumilov relied on meticulous planning and systematic training of personnel. His units were distinguished by high discipline and coordinated actions, even in difficult training conditions. Mikhail Stepanovich paid special attention to combat training in conditions close to real ones. He was one of the first to realize that the coming war would require initiative and independent decision-making from commanders at all levels. When the Great Patriotic War broke out on June 22, 1941, Shumilov met it at the head of the 32nd Rifle Corps of the Kiev Special Military District. From the first days of the war, the corps under his command engaged in the heaviest defensive battles on the southwestern front. During this critical period, Shumilov's best qualities as a military leader became apparent. Coolness in critical situations and the ability to maintain troop control even in rapidly changing circumstances. In August 1941, Shumilov was appointed deputy commander of the 21st Army, which was fighting heavy battles while encircled near Kiev. It was here that his talent as an organizer of a breakthrough from the enemy ring was fully revealed. Under his leadership, a significant part of the Army's formations managed to break out of the encirclement, retaining their combat capability and heavy weaponry. This experience would later prove invaluable in the Battle of Stalingrad. The winter campaign of 1941–1942 became a time of accumulating invaluable experience for Shumilov. He participated in the planning and execution of counterattacks near Moscow, where Soviet troops first seized the strategic initiative. Mikhail Stepanovich carefully studied the tactics of German troops, their strengths and weaknesses, which later helped him build an effective defense on the southern approaches to Stalingrad. In the spring of 1942, when the German command was preparing a decisive offensive in the southern direction, Shumilov received a new appointment. He was entrusted with the formation and training of the 64th Army, a formation that was to play a key role in the Battle of Stalingrad. With his characteristic methodicalness, Mikhail Stepanovich approached the staffing of the headquarters and the selection of commanding personnel. He personally interviewed officers, selecting those who already had combat experience and had proven themselves in difficult situations. Special attention was paid to the training of artillery units, which, in Shumilov's opinion, were to become the backbone of the defense. In the summer of 1942, when German tank wedges rushed to the Volga, the 64th Army under Shumilov's command took up positions on the southern approaches to Stalingrad. Ahead was the greatest battle of the war, in which Mikhail Stepanovich was to demonstrate all his qualities as a military leader. The summer of 1942 became a turning point in the fate of Mikhail Shumilov. It was then, at the height of the German offensive in the southern direction, that the Stavka of the Supreme High Command decided to form the 64th Army. On July 22nd, Lieutenant General Shumilov was appointed its commander, a choice that would later prove fateful for the defense of Stalingrad. The Army's formation took place under extreme conditions, as the enemy rapidly advanced towards the Volga. The new formation was built upon units from the 1st and 24th Armies, which had suffered heavy losses in previous battles, but retained a corps of experienced soldiers and commanders. Shumilov understood that the key to success would be the proper selection of command personnel. He personally interviewed officers, preferring those who had already passed through the crucible of battle and demonstrated the ability to make independent decisions in critical situations. Special attention was paid to the commanders of artillery units. Mikhail Stepanovich, relying on his combat experience, considered artillery to be the decisive force in defense. The organizational structure of the Army was formed with future tasks in mind. It included the 38th, 292nd, and 299th Rifle Divisions, the 137th Tank Brigade, and several artillery regiments. Shumilov insisted on strengthening anti-tank capabilities, anticipating that the main German thrust would be delivered by armored vehicles. To increase mobility, special maneuver groups were formed, capable of rapidly redeploying to threatened sectors. Mikhail Stepanovich personally inspected each unit, paying particular attention to the organization of communication and interaction between units. He understood that in dynamic combat conditions, loss of control could be fatal. The Army headquarters gathered officers with analytical minds, capable of quickly assessing the changing situation and proposing unconventional solutions. The strategic tasks assigned to the 64th Army were extremely clear and exceptionally complex. It was to cover the southern approaches to Stalingrad, preventing the breakthrough of German tank wedges to the Volga. Of particular importance was holding Krasnoarmeysk, the southern district of the city where important industrial facilities were located and through which key communications passed. Shumilov developed an echeloned defense system, providing for the possibility of flexible maneuvering of forces and means. He rejected rigid attachment of units to terrain, instead creating mobile combat groups capable of quickly reacting to changes in the situation. Special attention was paid to reconnaissance. Shumilov demanded constant monitoring of enemy movements to anticipate the directions of his main strikes. In conditions of limited time and resources, Mikhail Stepanovich proved himself to be a talented organizer. He managed to establish cooperation with local authorities and the civilian population for the construction of defensive lines. Thousands of Stalingrad residents, under the guidance of military engineers of the 64th Army, built anti-tank obstacles, dug trenches and ditches. By early August 1942, Shumilov's army was a well-coordinated combat organism, ready to repel the enemy's offensive. Ahead were months of the toughest battles, which would test both the commander and his soldiers, but the foundation of future victory was laid precisely in these intense days of the Army's formation. In the first days of August 1942, the 64th Army, under the command of Lieutenant General Shumilov, took up defensive positions on the distant approaches to Stalingrad. Reconnaissance reported the rapid advance of Goth's 4th Panzer Army, aimed at the southern outskirts of the city. Mikhail Stepanovich understood. Every day the enemy was delayed was an invaluable gain for strengthening the main line of defense. The first serious engagement took place on August 7th in the area of the Oksai River. German tank units, supported by aviation, attacked the positions of the 299th Rifle Division. Shumilov personally arrived at the division's command post to assess the situation. His decision was unconventional. Instead of rigid defense, he ordered the organization of a mobile defense with successive withdrawals to pre-prepared lines. The main thing is to preserve personnel and equipment, exhaust the enemy, and force him to stretch his communications. This was the task the Army commanders set for his officers. Shumilov's tactics yielded initial results. The Germans, accustomed to swift breakthroughs, unexpectedly encountered an elastic defense, as Soviet units retreated, delivering flank counterattacks, mining roads, and setting up ambushes along the routes of advancing tank columns. Mikhail Stepanovich paid special attention to anti-tank defense. By his order, artillery regiments were broken into small mobile groups operating from ambushes. German tank crews, accustomed to frontal assaults, suffered unexpected losses from the fire of camouflaged anti-tank guns, striking their flanks and rear. By mid-August, the fighting had shifted to the outer defensive perimeter of Stalingrad. Here, Shumilov employed the tactic of strongholds, fortified defensive nodes with a circular fire system. False positions were created between them, provoking the enemy into useless attacks. One of the key moments was the battle for the heights near the village of Tinguta. Understanding their strategic importance, the army commander concentrated the best anti-tank weapons and several batteries of Guards mortars there. When German tanks attacked, they fell under concentrated artillery fire and katyushas. In one day, the enemy lost more than 30 tanks, but was unable to break through the defense. Shumilov was constantly at the front, moving between the most dangerous sectors. Division commanders noted his ability to quickly assess the situation and make decisions without waiting for detailed staff reports. At the same time, he never raised his voice, giving orders calmly and clearly. On August 23, 1942, German troops reached the Volga north of Stalingrad, cutting through the Soviet defense line. Now, the main burden of the fighting fell on the shoulders of Chuikov's 62nd Army, defending the city center, and Shumilov's 64th Army, holding the southern lines. Mikhail Stepanovich immediately reorganized the defense system, concentrating the main forces on key directions: Kupyatskoye, Beketovka, Krasnoarmeysk. These areas became the shield against which all German attempts to close the encirclement around Stalingrad from the south were shattered. The defense of Beketovka, an industrial area with important enterprises and Volga berths, was of particular importance. Shumilov personally supervised the creation of a multi-layered defense system here. Every house was turned into a fortress, basements were connected by underground passages, creating a unified network of strongholds. The army commander appeared almost daily at the positions of the 299th Rifle Division, which was defending this sector, delving into the smallest details of the defense organization. "Here we stand to the death." These words of Shumilov became the motto of the defenders of southern Stalingrad. In early September, the German command, realizing the strategic importance of the southern regions, threw parts of the 29th Motorized and 14th Tank Divisions against Shumilov's army. The main blow fell on the village of Kupyatskoye, an important communication hub. The enemy expected to quickly reach the Volga with a rapid thrust, but encountered powerful anti-tank defenses. Shumilov had foreseen this direction of attack and had reinforced the sector in advance with artillery and anti-tank reserves. In 3 days of fierce fighting, the Germans lost more than 50 tanks, but were unable to break through to the river. Krasnoarmeysk, the southern industrial outskirts of Stalingrad, became another key point of defense. Important enterprises and a railway junction, through which troops were supplied, were located here. Understanding the strategic importance of this area, Shumilov created a powerful defensive area here, saturated with artillery and engineering obstacles. A feature of Shumilov's tactics in urban conditions was the skillful use of terrain and industrial structures. Factory chimneys became observation posts, basements, command posts, and railway embankments, natural anti-tank obstacles. Unlike the northern part of the city, where continuous street fighting took place, a positional front line was formed in the southern direction. This required a different approach to defense organization from the army commander. Shumilov created a system of false positions and firing points, constantly keeping the enemy under tension. German aviation daily struck the positions of the 64th Army, but thanks to skillful camouflage and dispersion of troops, the effectiveness of these bombardments remained low. By mid-September, the German offensive in the southern direction had run out of steam. The enemy went on the defensive, concentrating its main efforts on assaulting the central part of the city. This was Shumilov's first major tactical victory in the Battle of Stalingrad. His army not only withstood the blows of superior enemy forces, but also maintained its combat effectiveness, which was crucial for the future counteroffensive. In the history of the Battle of Stalingrad, a special place is occupied by the strategic interaction of two key armies: the 62nd, under the command of Vasily Chuikov, and the 64th, under the leadership of Mikhail Shumilov. These two formations, like two shields, covered the city from different directions. Chuikov held the center and north. Shumilov defended the southern borders. Their coordinated actions became one of the decisive factors that allowed Stalingrad to withstand the most difficult months of autumn and winter of '42. The interaction between the armies was built on several levels. At the strategic level, coordination was carried out by the headquarters of the Stalingrad front. But in conditions of constantly changing circumstances and communication disruptions, personal contacts between the army commanders played a special role. Shumilov and Chuikov regularly exchanged information about enemy movements, coordinated artillery fire at the junctions of the armies, and synchronized the actions of reconnaissance groups. Especially valuable was the information about the regrouping of German troops. Noticing a weakening of pressure in one sector, the army commanders immediately informed each other, understanding that this could mean an increase in pressure in the neighboring direction. The personal relationship between Shumilov and Chuikov was not easy. The two army commanders had different temperaments and leadership styles. Chuikov, impulsive, emotional, prone to decisive actions. Shumilov, methodical, restrained, preferring careful analysis of the situation. These differences sometimes led to disagreements in choosing tactics, but ultimately became an advantage, allowing them to find optimal solutions to complex combat tasks. A key moment of interaction was the October battles of '42, when the German command made a last attempt to capture the city. The main blow fell on Chuikov's army positions in the factory area, but at the same time, attacks intensified in the southern direction. In this critical situation, Shumilov, understanding the strategic importance of the central areas of the city, transferred part of his artillery reserves to support his neighbor. This maneuver, not foreseen by the initial defense plan, became possible due to the personal agreement of the army commanders, and played an important role in repelling the German assault. A special role in coordinating actions was played by liaison officers, constantly circulating between the army headquarters. These people, risking their lives, crossed the shot-through sections of the Volga embankment, delivering operational information and orders. Shumilov and Chuikov highly appreciated their selflessness, often personally noting distinguished signalmen with awards. Mikhail Stepanovich Shumilov's command style particularly highlighted his ability to maintain composure in critical situations. When most commanders faltered under pressure, Shumilov displayed remarkable clarity of thought and strength of character. His staff officers recalled that even during the most intense moments of the battles for Stalingrad, the army commander's voice remained calm, and his instructions were clear and specific. One striking example of Shumilov's unconventional thinking was his decision in September 1942, when German forces launched a powerful assault on Krasnoarmeysk. Instead of traditionally reinforcing defenses in the direction of the main thrust, Mikhail Stepanovich ordered a simulated retreat in that sector, while simultaneously preparing a flanking counterattack with a tank brigade and penal companies. The Germans, caught up in the pursuit of the supposedly retreating Soviet units, fell into a cunningly prepared trap and suffered heavy losses. Shumilov successfully applied this principle of Eastern martial arts to army-scale operations. He rarely threw troops into frontal counterattacks, preferring maneuver, outflanking, and sudden strikes against enemy communications and rear areas. A special element of Shumilov's command style was his ability to work with people. Unlike many military leaders of that time, he never humiliated subordinates, never yelled, and never threatened court-martial for every mistake. Instead, he sought to understand the reasons for failures, help correct shortcomings, and support initiative. This approach fostered an atmosphere of trust between the army commander and the officer corps, which was especially important in critical situations. During the most difficult days of the defense of Stalingrad, Shumilov personally visited the front lines daily, interacting with soldiers and commanders. He appeared precisely where it was most difficult, where people needed moral support. At the same time, the army commander never limited himself to general phrases about patriotism. He spoke to the soldiers about specific combat missions, explained the importance of the positions held, and shared information about the situation in other sectors of the front. One of Shumilov's strengths as a commander was his ability to foresee developments. In October 1942, when most analysts believed that the Germans would continue their assault on the central districts of Stalingrad, he predicted a shift in the direction of the main attack to the southern flank and reinforced the defense of Kuparosnoye in advance. Events fully confirmed his prediction. A week later, fierce battles unfolded precisely there. In critical situations, Shumilov was able to make tough but necessary decisions. When the Germans managed to breach the defenses of the 238th Rifle Division in November, the army commander unhesitatingly threw his last reserve, the Army Headquarters Guard Battalion, into a counterattack. This risk paid off. The breakthrough was eliminated, and the positions were held. Mikhail Stepanovich attached great importance to intelligence and information analysis. A special analytical group operated at the headquarters of the 64th Army, processing data from all types of intelligence, military, aerial, and agent, around the clock. Shumilov personally participated in evaluating intelligence, often noticing details and patterns that escaped the attention of staff officers. On November 19, 1942, Operation Uranus began, a strategic counter-offensive by Soviet troops near Stalingrad. For Shumilov's 64th Army, this meant a radical change in objectives. From a defensive formation, it was to transform into a striking force. Mikhail Stepanovich personally supervised the preparation of the troops for the offensive, understanding the full complexity of this transition. Months of positional defense had forged a certain psychology among the soldiers. Now it was necessary to reorient their thinking towards an offensive mindset. On the eve of the operation, Shumilov gathered division and regimental commanders. These words from the army commander became a guide to action. According to the plan of Operation Uranus, the 64th Army was to advance from the bridgehead south of Stalingrad in a northwesterly direction. The goal was to link up with units of the Southwestern Front in the Soviet area, thereby closing the encirclement ring around Paulus's German grouping. Shumilov developed a detailed offensive plan, paying special attention to the interaction of infantry, tanks, and artillery. He understood that the success of the operation depended on the speed of advance, so he created special mobile groups that were to rapidly move deep into enemy defenses without getting involved in protracted battles for every strongpoint. On the morning of November 20th, after a powerful artillery barrage, units of the 64th Army went on the offensive. The first hours of the battle showed that the enemy, despite the surprise of the attack, put up fierce resistance. The German command quickly transferred reserves to the threatened sector, trying to close the gap in the defense. Shumilov, receiving information about strong resistance in the central sector, decided to strengthen flank attacks. Colonel Sajan's 229th Rifle Division was particularly successful, advancing 8 kilometers by the end of the first day of the offensive, creating a threat of encirclement of the German defense node in the Plotovitoy area. The army commander immediately supported this success by transferring a tank brigade and additional artillery to the division's sector. By the evening of November 21st, the enemy's defenses were breached to their full depth. Shumilov moved his command post closer to the front line to personally direct the development of the offensive. He understood that the main thing now was not to let the enemy recover and organize a new line of defense. By his order, advanced units continued to move even at night, using vehicles captured from the Germans to increase mobility. On November 23rd, a historic event occurred. Units of Shumilov's 64th Army linked up with troops of the Southwestern Front in the area of the Sovetski Khutor. The encirclement ring around Paulus's grouping closed. Mikhail Stepanovich personally went to the meeting point of the troops, where he met with the commander of the 21st Army, General Chistyakov. This moment was captured by frontline photographers and went down in the history of the Great Patriotic War as a symbol of a turning point in the Battle of Stalingrad. On January 10, 1943, Operation Ring began, the final stage of the Battle of Stalingrad. Shumilov's 64th Army was assigned one of the key roles in eliminating Paulus's encircled grouping. Mikhail Stepanovich meticulously prepared his troops for this operation, understanding its historical significance. On the eve of the offensive, he gathered the commanders of the formations. The enemy is squeezed in a ring, but remains dangerous. Our task is to methodically, step by step, tighten this ring, giving the Germans not the slightest chance to break through. Shumilov paid special attention to artillery, which was to become the main strike force. At his direction, artillery observers had already pinpointed all key targets in the enemy's defense: command posts, communication hubs, concentrations of equipment. On the morning of January 10, a powerful artillery strike fell on German positions. Then, the infantry units of the 64th Army went on the offensive. The enemy put up fierce resistance. Every house, every basement had to be taken with a fight. Shumilov, who commanded the operation from his command post, constantly adjusted the actions of the troops, transferring reserves to the most important sectors. By January 15th, Shumilov's army had advanced several kilometers, capturing important German strongholds in the southern part of the cauldron. Particularly fierce battles unfolded for the village of Voroponovo, where the enemy had created a powerful defense node. Mikhail Stepanovich made an unconventional decision. Instead of a frontal assault, he organized a flanking maneuver, simultaneously carrying out demonstrative actions from the front. The Germans, misled, discovered the threat of encirclement too late, and were forced to abandon the fortified area. On January 26th, a historical event occurred. Units of the 64th Army linked up with troops of Chuikov's 62nd Army in the area of Mamayev-Kurgan, cutting the encircled grouping into two parts. The southern grouping, pressed against the Volga, found itself in a particularly difficult situation. It was here, in the basement of a destroyed department store, that the headquarters of the 6th Army, led by Field Marshal Paulus, was located. Shumilov, having received this information from intelligence, personally developed a plan for capturing the German command. On January 31st, a special group of officers of the 64th Army, led by Major Vinokur, infiltrated the department store building and presented Paulus with an ultimatum to surrender. The field marshal, understanding the hopelessness of the situation, surrendered. Mikhail Stepanovich personally interrogated Paulus, showing correctness and respect for the defeated enemy. This episode vividly characterizes Shumilov, not only as a talented commander, but also as a man of high culture. On February 2, 1943, the resistance of the encircled grouping completely ceased. The Battle of Stalingrad ended with a triumphant victory for the Soviet troops. For Mikhail Shumilov, this victory became the pinnacle of his commandership. His army went from the most difficult defense to a crushing offensive, making a decisive contribution to the defeat of the elite Wehrmacht formations. The results of the Battle of Stalingrad are difficult to overestimate. The strategic initiative finally passed to the Red Army, and the myth of the invincibility of the German war machine was dispelled. The 64th Army under Shumilov's command played a key role in this historical turning point. For skillful leadership of troops, Mikhail Stepanovich was awarded the Order of Suvorov First Class and promoted to the rank of Colonel General. But the main reward for him was the transformation of the 64th Army into the 7th Guards, the highest recognition of the combat merits of the formation. New battles, new victories were ahead. But it was Stalingrad that forever remained in Shumilov's biography as the main test and the main triumph. After the capitulation of German troops in Stalingrad, the 64th Army, which had distinguished itself brilliantly in defense and offense, received a special award. By order of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief on March 1, 1943, it was reorganized into the 7th Guards Army. This high title became a recognition of the exceptional merits of the formation and its commander, Colonel General Mikhail Shumilov. For Mikhail Stepanovich himself and his soldiers, the Guards' banners symbolized not only the recognition of past merits, but also a special responsibility for future battles. Now, only victorious results were expected from the army. Shumilov's army spent the spring and early summer of 1943 in intensive preparation for new operations. Personnel were replenished, new equipment arrived, and exercises were conducted. Mikhail Stepanovich personally supervised the training process of the recruits, understanding that the success of future battles largely depended on the coordinated actions of veterans and new recruits. Special attention was paid to the training of assault groups for breaking through fortified enemy positions. The 7th Guards received its baptism of fire in July 1943 on the Kursk Bulge. Shumilov's army occupied positions on the southern face of the salient, where one of the main strikes of German troops was expected. When the enemy launched an offensive on July 5, Shumilov's guards met him with organized defense. Deeply echeloned positions, saturated with anti-tank artillery, became an insurmountable obstacle for German tank divisions. Shumilov applied tactics honed back in Stalingrad, flexible, maneuverable defense with active use of counterattacks. Over 6 days of fierce fighting, the Germans were able to advance only a few kilometers, losing dozens of tanks and hundreds of soldiers. On July 12th, when the counteroffensive of Soviet troops began, the 7th Guards Army moved from defense to decisive offensive actions. Shumilov skillfully organized the pursuit of the retreating enemy, preventing him from consolidating on intermediate lines. By the beginning of August, his army had advanced several tens of kilometers, liberating many settlements in the Belgorod region. The next serious test for Shumilov's army was the forcing of the Dnieper in the autumn of 1943. In late September, the advanced units of the 7th Guards reached the river in the area of Verkhnedneprovsk. They faced the most difficult task: to overcome a water barrier up to half a kilometer wide with active enemy resistance. Mikhail Stepanovich developed a detailed plan for the operation, providing for simultaneous forcing in several sectors in order to disperse the defending forces. On the night of September 25th, advanced battalions on makeshift means, boats, rafts, logs, began the crossing. The Germans opened hurricane fire but could no longer stop the Guards. By dawn, several bridgeheads had been established on the right bank, which were expanded and merged in the following days. For this operation, dozens of soldiers and commanders of the 7th Guards were awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. Shumilov himself was awarded the Order of Kutuzov First Class. In the winter and spring of 1944, Shumilov's army participated in the liberation of right bank Ukraine. His troops particularly distinguished themselves during the Kirovograd and Uman-Botoshani operations. Operating in difficult conditions of spring mud, the 7th Guards broke through the enemy's defenses and, performing a rapid maneuver, reached the rear of a large German group. This maneuver, conceived and brilliantly implemented by Shumilov, led to the encirclement and destruction of significant enemy forces. In August 1944, Shumilov's army took part in the Iasi-Chisinau operation, which resulted in the liberation of Moldova and the withdrawal of Romania from the war. Operating in one of the main directions, the 7th Guards broke through the enemy's defenses and developed a rapid offensive deep into his positions. Mikhail Stepanovich's skillful leadership allowed the opposing forces to be defeated in the shortest possible time and created conditions for the encirclement of a large enemy group. In the spring of 1944, the 7th Guards Army, under the command of Mikhail Shumilov, reached the borders of the Soviet Union. Behind them lay the bloody battles for Stalingrad, the engagements on the Kursk salient, the forcing of the Dnieper, and the liberation of Ukraine. Now, the army faced a new task: the liberation of Eastern European countries from fascist occupation. For Shumilov, this meant not only military but also political challenges. They were to fight on the territory of other states, build relations with the local population, and coordinate actions with allies. In August 1944, the 7th Guards Army took part in the Iasi-Chisinau operation, during which Soviet troops entered Romanian territory. Shumilov issued a special order to the army: "We enter the land of a foreign state not as conquerors, but as liberators. Our attitude towards the civilian population must be correct and humane. We bring freedom to the peoples of Europe from the fascist yoke." These words became a guide to action for every soldier. A distinctive feature of the military operations on Romanian territory was the interaction with local anti-fascist forces. Shumilov skillfully established contact with Romanian patriots, who provided valuable intelligence about the location of German troops and assisted as guides. When the German command attempted to use Romanian units to cover the retreat of their main forces, Mikhail Stepanovich ordered active propaganda work, urging Romanian soldiers to lay down their arms. This tactic bore fruit. Entire units of the Romanian army defected to the Soviet side. In October, the 7th Guards Army entered Hungary. Here, the situation proved more complex. Hungarian troops, unlike the Romanians, continued fierce resistance. Particularly heavy fighting erupted for the city of Debrecen, a vital transport hub. Shumilov employed a tactic of deep envelopment, sending part of his forces around the city from the north and south. This maneuver allowed them to avoid protracted street fighting and minimize damage to the city's infrastructure. The residents of Debrecen gratefully welcomed the Soviet soldiers, seeing them as liberators from the fascist regime. In the winter of 1944-45, Shumilov's army participated in the Budapest operation. The capital of Hungary had been turned by the Germans into a powerful fortified area. An assault on the city could have led to enormous casualties among the civilian population and the destruction of historical monuments. Mikhail Stepanovich proposed a plan to the front command for blockading the city with a gradual tightening of the encirclement. This tactic, perfected back in Stalingrad, allowed them to avoid frontal assaults on fortified districts. In March 1945, the 7th Guards Army entered Austria. Here, Shumilov faced a new problem: the need to coordinate actions with Western allies, whose troops were approaching from the opposite direction. Demarcation lines were established, information exchange was set up, and meetings of liaison officers were organized. The final chord in the combat path of Shumilov's army was its participation in the Prague offensive. When news arrived of the uprising in the capital of Czechoslovakia, the 7th Guards made a swift, forced march to aid the insurgents. On May 9, 1945, units of the army entered liberated Prague, where they were met by jubilant residents. The military leadership of Mikhail Shumilov represents a unique phenomenon in the history of Soviet military thought. Analyzing his command style, military historians highlight several characteristic features that allowed him to achieve outstanding results in the most challenging combat situations. First and foremost, this is a rare combination of strategic thinking with tactical flexibility. Shumilov was able to see the overall picture of a battle without missing critically important details in individual sectors of the front. Unlike many Soviet commanders of the initial period of the war, he avoided stereotypical solutions, preferring to adapt tactics to the specific conditions of combat and the nature of the enemy's actions. This was particularly evident in the defense of the southern districts of Stalingrad, where the 64th Army, under his command, successfully resisted German tank formations, which possessed a significant numerical superiority. Shumilov developed a system of echeloned defense with mobile reserves, which were promptly redeployed to threatened sectors. This approach allowed for the conservation of forces and resources, concentrating them precisely where the greatest danger of a breakthrough arose. It is noteworthy that many tactical techniques employed by Shumilov in Stalingrad subsequently became part of military art textbooks and were studied in military academies. A crucial element of Shumilov's leadership style was his ability to make unconventional decisions. When, in September 1942, German units launched a massive offensive against the positions of the 64th Army in the Zaporozhnoye area, Mikhail Stepanovich employed a tactic of feigned retreat. By creating an illusion of a successful breakthrough for the enemy, he lured German tank units into a prepared trap, where they came under flanking attacks from camouflaged artillery. This operation, conducted with minimal losses for Soviet troops, resulted in the destruction of over 30 German tanks and thwarted the enemy's plans to reach the Volga on the southern sector of the front. Analyzing Shumilov's management methods, one cannot fail to note his special approach to working with command personnel. In contrast to the widespread practice at the time of rigid administration and threats, Mikhail Stepanovich relied on trust in subordinates and the encouragement of initiative. He regularly held debriefings of combat operations where commanders of all levels could openly express their opinions and propose solutions. Such a democratic leadership style was rare in wartime conditions, but it was precisely what allowed the 64th Army to form a corps of competent and independent officers capable of making effective decisions in the absence of direct orders from above. Another important aspect of Shumilov's military leadership was his ability for strategic foresight. In October 1942, when most analysts expected the continuation of the German assault on the central part of Stalingrad, Mikhail Stepanovich predicted the enemy's shift of main efforts to the southern flank and reinforced the defense of this direction in advance. Events fully confirmed his forecast. A week later, fierce battles unfolded precisely there. This ability to anticipate enemy actions was based not on intuition, but on a deep analysis of intelligence data, knowledge of the Wehrmacht's military doctrine, and the psychology of the German command. Shumilov created a special analytical group at the Army headquarters, which processed information from all types of intelligence around the clock, from prisoner testimonies to aerial photography. Such a scientific approach to planning combat operations was significantly ahead of its time and anticipated modern methods of military analysis. After the end of the Great Patriotic War, Mikhail Stepanovich Shumilov continued his service in the ranks of the armed forces. His rich combat experience and outstanding organizational abilities were in demand in peacetime. In 1946, he was appointed commander of the Voronezh military district, where he proved himself to be a talented administrator and mentor to the younger generation of officers. In his new post, Shumilov paid much attention to generalizing the combat experience of the past war. Under his leadership, conferences and seminars were held where officers studied the lessons of the Battle of Stalingrad and other major operations. Mikhail Stepanovich considered it his duty to pass on the accumulated knowledge to future defenders of the fatherland. "The war taught us a lot," he told young officers. "And the main lesson is that one must prepare for peace as seriously as for war. In 1949, Shumilov was transferred to the position of commander of the Belarusian military district. Here, on land abundantly watered with the blood of Soviet soldiers, he led the restoration of military infrastructure and the combat training of troops in the new post-war conditions. A special place in Mikhail Stepanovich's life was occupied by public activities related to perpetuating the memory of the Battle of Stalingrad. He regularly gave lectures and recollections, met with young people, and participated in the creation of memorial complexes. On his initiative, a rich archive of documents and photographs reflecting the heroic defense of southern Stalingrad was collected. In 1958, Colonel General Shumilov retired, but did not withdraw from active work. He became one of the founders of the Soviet Committee of War Veterans, where he headed the section of participants in the Battle of Stalingrad. Thanks to his efforts, connections between veterans of the 64th Army were established and maintained, and their meetings and mutual assistance were organized. Mikhail Stepanovich's personal life in the post-war years was not easy. The war left its mark, undermined health, the loss of close friends. But his faithful wife, Maria Nikolaevna, who shared all the difficulties and joys with him, was always by his side. Their home in Moscow became a place for constant meetings of Stalingrad veterans, where, in a warm, friendly atmosphere, they remembered their comrades in arms and the difficult roads of war. In the 60s, Shumilov actively participated in the creation of the memorial complex on Mamayev Kurgan. He advised sculptors and architects, shared memories, and helped restore the chronology of events. Especially important for him was the truthful reflection of the role of the 64th Army in the defense of the city. Every year on February 2nd, the day of the end of the Battle of Stalingrad, Mikhail Stepanovich came to Volgograd. He met with veterans, spoke to young people, and visited the sites of past battles. For the residents of the city, he was a living legend, a man whose name is forever inscribed in the heroic history of their native land. On June 28, 1975, Mikhail Stepanovich Shumilov passed away. He was buried in Moscow at the Novodevichy Cemetery with full military honors. Thousands of people came to bid farewell to the legendary army commander, from marshals to ordinary veterans of his army. The name of Mikhail Stepanovich Shumilov today occupies a special place in the pantheon of outstanding commanders of the Great Patriotic War. Modern historical science recognizes his key role in the defense of Stalingrad, a battle that changed the course of world history. As commander of the 64th Army, which under his leadership transformed into the 7th Guards Army, Shumilov embodied the best qualities of a Soviet military leader: a deep analytical mind, tactical flexibility, and an unbending will to victory. Historians note the uniqueness of Shumilov's command style, which combined methodicalness and innovation. Unlike many commanders who preferred spectacular solutions, he relied on meticulous planning and systematic preparation. At the same time, he was distinguished by his ability to make unconventional tactical moves, which repeatedly ensured superiority over the enemy, even when German troops had a numerical advantage. Modern military theorists highly value Shumilov's developed system of echeloned defense with mobile reserves, a tactic that formed the basis of military academy curricula. In modern Russia, Shumilov's memory is carefully preserved. In Volgograd, one of the central streets bears his name, a monument has been erected, and a museum of the 64th Army has been created. Scientific conferences dedicated to the study of his military legacy are held annually. School children and students study the commander's biography and history lessons, and cadets of military schools analyze his tactical decisions. In the 2000s, previously classified documents were published, shedding light on Shumilov's role in planning Operation Uranus and the capture of Field Marshal Paulus. These materials allowed for a new assessment of the scale of his strategic thinking. It is noteworthy that the assessment of Shumilov's contribution to victory is recognized not only by domestic, but also by foreign historians. In the studies of German military analysts, his ability to counter Wehrmacht tank wedges by employing flexible defense and unexpected counterattacks is particularly noted. British historian Anthony Beevor, in his monograph on the Battle of Stalingrad, calls Shumilov a master of defensive operations, whose name undeservedly remains in the shadow of more famous Soviet commanders. Among Soviet military leaders, Shumilov occupies a special place. He belongs to the cohort of commanders who went from the Civil War to victory, managing to adapt to the rapidly changing conditions of modern warfare. At the same time, unlike many of his contemporaries, he avoided the repressions of the 1930s, maintaining loyalty to military duty and professionalism. Mikhail Shumilov's military legacy remains relevant in the context of modern armed conflicts. His experience in organizing the defense of a large city, the interaction of various branches of service, and the command of large military formations under conditions of limited resources is studied by military specialists worldwide.